The pen came sliding across the table before the notary had finished reading, and my mother pushed it the last few inches with 2 fingers. The way you slide a plate toward a child who has already been told twice. Sign it, Andrea. You don't get to have questions about this family. You got on a plane. My niece was 11 and out of school for teacher workdays, and she sat 3 feet from me with her sneakers not touching the floor, and my mother turned her chin toward the child before she said the rest, so it would land where it was aimed. Your aunt left us. That's who she is. She left, and we stayed, and we're the ones who kept the lights on out there. It was a title office in a strip mall in Enfield, North Carolina, between a nail salon and a vacuum repair shop, carpet shampoo and burnt coffee. 3 miles east of that room sat 84 acres of hay and pine my grandmother had walked me across when I was 9, and this was where my mother had arranged for them to leave the family. 3 things were on the table. A manila folder with a title company's name on the tab. A truck key on a fat black fob, the kind that comes with a new Ram 2500, by my brother's elbow. And a document with my name typed at the bottom, waiting. It's clerical, my mother said. The taxes out there are eating us alive. Your daddy already signed his part. My father looked at the ficus in the corner. What am I cleaning up? My voice came out level. That's the thing people misread about me. When it gets bad, I get quiet and accurate, and my mother has always heard that as agreement. Andrea. My brother said my name like he was closing a door on it. You're embarrassing her in front of people. I didn't raise my voice, because Sadie was watching me demonstrate what a grown woman does when she is told to be quiet, and because I decided in the parking lot she would not hear a fight about her father. In my coat pocket, my thumb found the loop of orange baling twine. My grandmother nodded through a brass gate key when I was 9, and I ran my thumbnail down the seam of it until it hurt. The notary was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses shoved up into gray hair. Her nameplate said, Ruth Ann Kessler, and she hadn't touched the pen. She had been turning pages for 2 minutes without a word. She stopped. Ms. Palmer, can I ask where you were in November of 2024? My mother's hand came off her purse, went across the table, and closed around my brother's hand. Not a pat, a grip, the way you catch a wrist at the top of a staircase. I was here, I said, Halifax County, sleeping on the floor of my grandmother's bathroom. Mrs. Kessler turned the folder around and put one finger low on a page. This deed was drafted in May of last year. The acknowledgement attached to it says you personally appeared and signed on the 12th of November, 2024, in Porto, Portugal. My signature was very good. It had my ugly capital O and the flat place where my pen skips on the L, and it was dated 6 months before the document it belonged to existed, in a country I had not stood in since January of 2024. Sadie's sneakers stopped swinging. I know what a normal person does there. Screams. Turns to her mother. What I did was put both hands flat on the table so they would stop shaking, and say, May I have a copy of the whole file, please? That's family paperwork, my mother said. Ma'am, Mrs. Kessler said, she's a named grantor. She is entitled to it. Neither of them knew, holding hands across that table, that the acknowledgement page had a number stamped in the corner, an apostille number. Numbers like that belong to a public registry on another continent that anybody can search in about 40 seconds. Mrs. Kessler notarized nothing that day. She stood up in her cardigan and said she could not take an acknowledgement while there was a question about a prior signature, that she was required to report it to the Secretary of State, and that she would be keeping copies. My brother said her name twice, the way a man calls a dog that isn't coming back. She kept standing. I'm Andrea Palmer. I was 33 that February, and I want to say this while we are all still in that parking lot and before anybody has been arrested. If somebody once told you to stay quiet for the good of the family, and you did it, and the quiet cost you something you can't put a number on, stay with me for this one. I'm going to tell it in order. Hit follow so it doesn't get lost, and go get something hot to drink now. You'll want it in about 10 minutes. There was supposed to be a closing at 3 o'clock that afternoon on the last 23 acres, the piece with my grandmother's farmhouse on it. It did not happen. It could not. The file now had a notary's written refusal in it, and no underwriter on earth insures around that. By 4:15, my brother was out in the parking lot with his phone against one ear and his hand over the other. My mother came out to my car and knocked on the glass with one knuckle. I put the window down 4 inches. It's a mix-up at the lawyer's office, she said. Sherilyn's been sick. She's been out with her back since Easter and that whole office is a disaster. Whose signature is it, Mom? Don't do that. Whose signature is it? You are going to put your brother in a hole he can't climb out of, she said. Over land you haven't set foot on in 8 years. Behind her, through the back window of her Buick, I could see Sadie's face turned toward me, and Sadie's hand up flat against the glass, not waving. Just there. I want to tell you about the 8 years, because my mother said it like a verdict, and everybody in that family had agreed to it a long time ago. I did leave. In September of 2018, I took a job teaching at an international school in Porto, and I stayed 5 years, and I was not there when my grandmother started leaving the stove on. That part is true, and I've never been able to say it without my throat closing. Here's the part that never made it into the family's version. In January of 2024, my grandmother's doctor used the word hospice on the phone, and I broke my lease in Portugal in 9 days and came home and moved into her back bedroom, and I stayed there for 394 nights. I know the number because I wrote it down. Hospice sends you home with a binder, and every night you log the medication, the time, the intake, the pain number, the sleep. I have a cardboard box with 13 months of my own handwriting in it. 12:40 a.m., 2 milligrams, restless. 3:10 a.m., agitation, sat with her. Nobody else in that family ever wrote a line in that binder. My mother came Sundays after church and sat in the good chair for an hour and told my grandmother she looked wonderful. Verna Hollis died on the 9th of March, 2025, at 4:50 in the morning, and I was the one holding her hand, and the funeral program said surrounded by her loving family. The gate key had been mine since I was 9. She gave it to me on the tailgate of her truck with the orange twine already knotted through it, and she said, "You're the one who closes the gate." And for 24 years I believed that was a small thing about a gate. The morning after the notary's office, I drove out to the land to look at it. The gate was chained. There was a new galvanized padlock on it, and somebody had tied my grandmother's orange twine to the new lock, because that's what you do with twine, you reuse it. My key went in about a 1/4 inch and stopped. A woman came down the tree line toward me with a phone in her hand and a baby carrier on her hip, and she was maybe 30, and she was scared of me. She said, "Are you Palmer family? Because I have been trying to find somebody in the Palmer family since June." Her name was Junie Aldridge. She and her husband Cal had bought the 61 acres in the summer of 2025, all of it, with everything they had. And 10 days before, their surveyor had found 4 fieldstones standing up in the pines at the back of the property, in a square, the way people used to bury their own. She walked me back through the pines to show me. 4 stones the size of bread loaves, standing on end in a square about 12 feet across. And inside the square the ground was dished, the way old graves settle. Her surveyor had staked around it and told them not to touch anything until somebody figured out whose family it was. Because in this state, you cannot disturb a grave, and a descendant has a right of access to it, even when the land underneath belongs to somebody else. "We're not trying to take anything from anybody," Junie said. "We just want to know who's back here so we can put a fence around them." My great-grandparents were back there. My grandmother had brought me to those stones with a jar of zinnias every decoration day until I was 17. "When did you buy this?" I said. "June of last year." She shifted the baby carrier. 61 acres. We paid $612,000, and it was every dime we had and about half of Cal's daddy's retirement. Road frontage on 2 sides and a state highway coming through in 10 years. That is why it went for what it went for. June of last year. My grandmother had been dead 3 months. I had been in Charlotte in June of last year, in an apartment I could barely pay for, waiting for the estate to be settled by my mother, who had told me on the phone that these things take 18 months in North Carolina and that I should stop calling the lawyer because it ran up the bill. I asked Junie who she had bought it from. She said, "The whole family signed, your mama and your daddy and your brother and you. There is a particular sound the inside of your own head makes, not ringing, more like a room going quiet because someone has walked in." "I wrote you," she said, "in June. I sent a letter to the Palmer family address on the tax card because we couldn't find a phone number, and nobody ever wrote back, and I've been sick about it ever since." I didn't know it yet, But that letter was 9 feet from my mother's kitchen sink, in a drawer with the coupons. The Register of Deeds office in Halifax County is on the second floor of the courthouse, and it is one of the great free institutions of American life. Anybody can walk in. Anybody can pull any deed recorded since 1758 and stand at a counter reading it, and no one asks you why. I was there when they opened. Book 20144, page 903. General Warranty Deed. Grantors, Wendell R. Palmer and wife Lorraine H. Palmer, Grady A. Palmer, Andrea J. Palmer, unmarried. 61 acres, more or less, lying in Fawcett Township. Recorded the 23rd of June, 2025, at 11:07 a.m. My name in the middle of a paragraph, the way you'd list a piece of furniture. I read the acknowledgement page 4 times. There it was, exactly as Mrs. Kessler had said, a stamped certificate with a foreign seal and a line of Portuguese and the date the 12th of November, 2024, and an apostille number in the corner. I typed that number into the Portuguese registry on my phone standing at the counter. The record came back in about 40 seconds, and it existed, and it was real, and it belonged to a document filed in 2021. They had retyped the certificate. New date, new description of what was being signed, and underneath it they left the apostille exactly where it sat, seal and ribbon and number and all. The certificate on top said November of 2024. The number under it belonged to 2021. They had not forged an apostille, they had recycled one. I asked the clerk if she could run the whole tract for me, everything ever recorded against it, and she said, "Sure, honey," and printed 9 pages. There was a deed of trust I had never seen. Recorded the 4th of June, 2021. $180,000 borrowed against the land, secured by every interest in it, including a remainder interest that had belonged to me since 2016, when my grandmother put the farm into a deed that kept a life estate for herself and left the rest, when she died, to her 2 grandchildren. Grady and me. 50-50. Signed by Andrea J. Palmer. In June of 2021, I was in Porto. I really was. That is the part I could not get past, standing at that counter with a stranger's printouts in my hand. In 2021, the venue on the certificate was true. I was 5,000 miles away, teaching 5th graders how to write a paragraph, and somebody in my family sat down with a pen and became me, and then 4 years later, when they needed to do it again, they were too lazy or too rushed to fake a fresh one, so they retyped the old lie over the same seal and stapled it to the new one. The clerk asked if I was all right. I said I was fine, and I thanked her, and I asked her one more question, which was whether the recording book showed who had submitted the documents. She turned the page around. Both of them, 4 years apart, had been e-recorded by the same office, Boyette Title and Closing Services, Roanoke Rapids. Sherilyn Boyette taught the 3-year-old Sunday school class at my mother's church for 19 years. She brought a pound cake to my grandmother's funeral, and she put her hand on my face in the receiving line and told me I had done a beautiful thing, staying home with Verna like I did. Her office had a bell on the door. I did not go in there to accuse anybody. I want to be clear about that, because of what got said later. I went in and I asked, politely, for a copy of my own closing file, and when the girl at the front desk asked me who I was, I said I was a named grantor on a deed her office recorded, and I put my driver's license on the counter. Sherilyn came out of the back with her reading glasses on a chain. Andrea. She said it warmly, and then she looked at my license lying on the counter, and something went out of her face like a light being switched off in a room down the hall. Honey, we can't just hand out closing files. I'm a grantor, I said. It's my file. There's privacy involved. Whose? She stood there. I stood there. The girl at the desk had turned her monitor slightly away from me, and I looked at the monitor, and what was on it was a file index. A list of every document scanned into the Palmer file, each one with a date and a time. I read it upside down, and I read it fast, before Sherilyn stepped in front of the desk, and I wrote it on the back of my hand in the parking lot before I lost a word of it. Most of it was ordinary: title opinion, tax certification, settlement statement, wire confirmation. 2 lines were not ordinary. Remote online notarization session, Grantor O. Palmer, terminated. 11:42 a.m. Credential analysis failed. 3 attempts. And under it, 40 minutes later, Paper acknowledgement substituted. See prior apostille. Sherilyn, I said, what's a credential analysis? You need to talk to your mother. What's a credential analysis? She asked me to leave her place of business. I want to explain what those two lines meant, because it took me a day and a lawyer to understand it. And when I did, I had to sit down on a curb outside of Bojangles. Remote online notarization is a real thing in North Carolina now. You sit in front of a camera, you hold your ID up to the lens. The software reads the security features on the license and asks you questions only you would know, and it records the whole session, and by law the notary keeps that recording for 10 years. On the 9th of June 2025, somebody sat down in front of a camera and tried to be me, 3 times. And when the machine would not let her, they stopped trying to fake the present and went back and copied a piece of the past instead. There was a video of it somewhere. That was the thought I sat down on the curb with. Not a signature, not a page, a recording, kept by law, of a face. That night, I pulled the hospice box out of my trunk, where it had been living since I moved to Charlotte, and I sat on the motel bed in Roanoke Rapids and found November of 2024. November 12th, my handwriting, in blue pen, 3 lines. 11:40 p.m., 2 milligrams, restless, calling for her mother. 2:15 a.m., changed bed, sang. 4:05 a.m., slept. I did not. 394 nights of that, and every page initialed in the margin by the hospice nurse who came Tuesdays and Fridays. A woman named Faye Turnbow, who had been doing this work for 20 years, and who used to bring me the good coffee because she said the caregiver is the patient nobody bills for. While I was writing sang in that binder at 2:15 in the morning, a piece of paper existed in this world that said I was in Portugal, signing away the ground under her window. I put the binder in the passenger seat of my car, and I drove with it there for the next 6 months, like a person. The next day was a Thursday, and Sadie had swim at the Y in Roanoke Rapids, and my brother had not shown up to get her, which I found out because the Y called me. I was still listed as an emergency contact from the summer my grandmother was dying, when somebody had to be. She came out with her hair wet, and got in my car, and buckled up, and looked at the binder in the passenger seat, and moved it to her lap without asking, the way kids do. Is this Grandma Verna's? It's the medicine book. Can I look at it? I said yes, because there is nothing in it but the truth. She read for about 4 miles. Then she said, you were there every single night. Yes. They said you were in another country. I kept both hands on the wheel and I did not say a word about her father or her grandmother, because she was 11 and it was not her job to carry the difference between those 2 sentences. What I said was, I came home in January and I stayed until the end. Sadie put her finger on a page and said, this is your writing. It is. Grandma Lorraine writes your name a lot. I let the car go another 1/4 mile. What do you mean, sweetheart? On the yellow pad in the kitchen, she writes Andrea Palmer over and over down the whole page and then she tears it off. She said it's practice for the church letters, for the thank you notes, so they look nice. She was looking out the window at the Dollar General. She's got real good at it. I have replayed that sentence more times than the notaries. She's got real good at it, said by a child in a wet swimsuit, in the voice you would use about somebody's crochet. Then she said, are you mad at Daddy? No, because Grandma Lorraine says you are. We were at the light by the hospital. I said, I'm not mad at anybody today. Today I'm just finding out things. Sadie nodded and looked at her hands. And then she said something so quiet I almost lost it under the air conditioning. Great-grandma gave me something to keep. What did she give you? And my niece, who had been raised in that house since her mother left in 2019, looked at me with the exact face my grandmother used to make when the pharmacy called about a bill and said, I'm not supposed to say until you close the gate. I said, okay. I said, that's all right, you keep it then. I want you to remember that she was 11 and that she had been holding whatever it was for a year, alone, in a house full of adults who wrote my name on a yellow legal pad. Saturday morning I stopped at the Piggly Wiggly in Enfield for gas and a preacher put his hand on my cart. Emery Lyle is 71 years old and he baptized my brother in a farm pond, and he has never once in his life raised his voice. He said, Andrea, honey, I don't want to put you in the middle, but it's been 3 years and some of us are getting anxious. I said, anxious about what, Pastor? The solar. He explained it to me by the ice machine, apologizing the whole time. In 2023, my brother had put together what he called a family land syndicate. A power company was going to lease the Palmer tract for a solar array, he said, 40 years, guaranteed payments. And because it was family land, he could only let a few people in, and it would take a deposit to hold a share. $20,000 to hold a share. Some people put in more. Pastor Lyle had put in $25,000 out of a retirement account. How many people? I asked. He counted on his fingers and got to 8. A retired school principal, 2 brothers who run a grading outfit, the woman who did my grandmother's hair for 30 years, Doreen Satterwhite, who is 78 and put in $45,000 because Grady sat in her kitchen and showed her a map with the parcel outlined in yellow highlighter. $248,000 from 8 people who had known him since he was in diapers. There was no power company. There was never a power company. There was a map with a highlighter on it and a piece of land my brother did not own, could not sell, and had already borrowed against with a signature that wasn't his to make. Pastor Lyle patted my arm and told me not to worry about it, that it would sort itself out, and he went off down the aisle with his cart, and I stood by the ice machine and did the arithmetic I did not want to do. $612,000 from the Aldridges, $248,000 from the congregation, $180,000 from a bank in 2021. All of it against 84 acres that had been carrying a life estate belonging to a woman who was slowly forgetting the names of her own dogs. I drove to my parents' house that afternoon because Sadie's rescue inhaler was in my glove box from the pool and the child has exercise-induced asthma, and I was not going to leave it in a hot car all weekend. The kitchen door was open behind the screen. That house has one hallway, and it carries sound like a pipe. My mother was in the back bedroom with Sadie, and she was using the voice she uses at the church, the low kind, the one that sounds like comfort. Baby, listen to me. Your aunt is upset, and when she gets upset, she doesn't think about who she hurts. She's been down at the Register of Deeds pulling papers. She is trying to put your daddy in prison and take this house out from under your granddaddy. I heard Sadie say something I couldn't make out. No, sweetheart, that's not being a snitch. That's being loyal. And if anybody asks you, a lawyer or a lady from the county or anybody, you don't know anything about any box. You don't have a box. You never had a box. I stood on the concrete step with a child's inhaler in my hand, and I listened to my mother teach an 11-year-old how to lie to a court. That was the bottom. Not the deed, not the video, not the apostille. The bottom was a woman's voice going soft to make a little girl small enough to fit inside her story. I did not go in. I hung the inhaler on the door handle in its plastic bag, and I got in my car, and I sat at the end of that driveway for a long time with my hands at 10 and 2, and the only thing I could hear was my grandmother saying, "You're the one who closes the gate." On Monday I hired a lawyer. His name was Lowell Pike, and his office was over a barbecue place in Halifax, and he had done real property work in that county for 31 years. And when I laid the 9 pages from the Register of Deeds on his desk, he read them without saying anything for a long time, the same way Ruth Ann Kessler had. Then he said, "Ms. Palmer, I have to ask you a hard question, and I want you to think before you answer. Do you want this quiet, or do you want it right?" I said, "I want it on paper. Here is everything I did. I want you to hold on to this list, because people are going to tell you later that I burned my family down." I signed an affidavit that the signature on Book 2144, page 903 was not mine, and another one for the 2021 Deed of Trust. I recorded a notice of lis pendens against the tract, which is a public flag that says title to this land is disputed. I sent a certified letter to the title insurance company that had insured the Aldridges, telling them there was a claim on the policy they had written. And I gave a copy of everything to the Secretary of State's Notary Division, which already had Ruth Ann Kessler's report sitting in the same file. That is the entire list. 4 pieces of paper. I never called my mother. I never called my brother. I did not say one word to one person at that church. Everything that happened to my family after the 17th of February happened because of documents they had signed themselves, filed in offices that keep them forever, read by people whose whole job is to read them. Mr. Pike walked me out to the landing over the barbecue place and said, "You understand what a lis pendens does to a man who's borrowed against something?" I said I didn't. He said, "It calls his note." The lis pendens went on record at 9:40 on a Tuesday morning. I want to walk you through what a piece of paper like that does, because I did not know, And because, for the rest of that year, my mother told anybody who would listen that her daughter had hired a lawyer to destroy her own family. And the truth is, I had hired a lawyer to write down what was already true. By Tuesday afternoon, it had been picked up by the commercial data services that watch county filings, which is how lenders find out things. By Wednesday, the outfit that had loaned my brother $60,000 in the fall against what he had described to them as his interest in the last 23 acres sent him a notice of default. Not because he had missed a payment, because his loan documents, like everybody's loan documents, said he would not let a cloud fall on the collateral, and a cloud had fallen on it, and the note came due in full in 30 days. By Thursday, the land company out of Kinston that was supposed to buy the last 23 acres terminated its contract and demanded the return of $11,000 in due diligence money, which had already been spent. And on Friday, a lawyer named Dabney, who worked for First Carolina Title, called my lawyer to say that his company had insured the Aldridge purchase, and that his company had in its file a document called an owner's affidavit, sworn and signed at the closing table in June of 2025, in which the sellers swore under oath that they knew of no adverse claims, no unrecorded interests, and no defects in title. 3 people had signed that affidavit: my mother, my brother, and my father, who had spent 41 years at the volunteer fire department in Fawcett Township and who had never in his life been accused of anything worse than parking on the grass at the fairgrounds. I did not know it was coming. I want to say that plainly. When you pull one thread out of a title, you do not get to pick which knot it unties. Here's the part where they came for me. My mother called 41 times in 2 days. I listened to all of them eventually, in a lawyer's conference room, because they became evidence. The first ones were sugar. Honey, this is all a misunderstanding. Call me back. I made a pound cake. The middle ones were history. After everything I did for you, everything I gave up, you have no idea what it was like being the one who stayed here. The last ones stopped pretending. You listen to me. That child is not going to have a father because you wanted to be right. I hope that's worth it. I hope you sit with that. My brother came in person. It was after 10 at night, and I was staying at a motel off 158, and his truck came into the lot with the lights on high and sat there idling outside my door for about a minute and a half. I did not open it. I stood behind the curtain with my phone recording, and I watched a man I had shared a bathroom with for 18 years knock on a motel door with the flat of his hand. Andrea, come on, open the door and let's fix this like people, I said through the door. You can talk to Mr. Pike. I'll put it back. Every acre. I've got a thing coming through in October, a real thing, and I'll buy it back off the Aldridges and put it in your name and Sadie's name and it'll be like it never happened. With what? I didn't answer that. You're going to make Mama sick, he said. You know she's got the blood pressure. I looked at the chain on the door, which was the kind that comes out of the frame if a grown man leans on it, and I heard myself say the only sentence I said to my brother that entire year. Grady, I was there every night and you were never once in that house after dark. He stood in the parking lot light for a second. Then he hit the door once, not hard, the way you'd knock a wasp off a screen, and he got in the truck and left. I slept in my car in a church lot that night because I did not want a stranger at a front desk to have to referee my family. Now, from here on, you know things they did not know, and I want you to keep them in your hand while you listen, because it changes the taste of everything that comes next. They did not know that on the 20th of February, an investigator from the Secretary of State's office had sent a records demand to a company in Utah that hosts remote online notarization sessions for small closing offices across 9 states. They did not know that the platform's own retention policy, the one the notary agreed to when she bought her seat on it, keeps every session for 10 years, finished or not, because that is how a vendor keeps itself out of a lawsuit. They did not know that a terminated session is not a deleted session. My mother spent the last week of February calling everybody in that church to tell them her daughter had gone crazy over money. She sat in the 3rd pew on Sunday with her hand on my father's arm. She got 2 casseroles. She had no idea that a woman in an office in Raleigh had already watched her. They called us in on the 11th of March. Mr. Pike, me, and a lawyer from the Secretary of State's office, and Mr. Dabney from the title company, in a conference room with a screen on the wall. The investigator said, Ms. Palmer, I have to warn you that people find this difficult. I said I understood. It was a kitchen. That was the first thing. Not an office, not a closing table. My mother's kitchen, shot from a laptop propped on the table where I ate cereal for 18 years, and behind her on the wall the wooden plaque that says, "Ask for me in my house," and the corner of the refrigerator with a postcard on it. I could see the postcard. It was a picture of the Douro River. I mailed it in 2019. She had her hair done. She had done her hair for it. The screen prompt asked her to state her full legal name. And my mother, 63 years old, a woman who has taught the 4-year-olds Christmas program since 1998, leaned toward the camera and said, "Andrea Jean Palmer." Then she held up a passport. It was my passport. My old one. The one with the corner clipped. The one I had left in a box at their house when I moved to Charlotte because you keep your expired passports. Everybody does. She held it up to the lens and turned it so the picture faced the camera, and she said, "That's me." The software asked her to move the document closer. She moved it closer. The software asked her a knowledge-based question. The kind they pull from public records. What street did you live on in 2014? My mother looked off camera and said, "Grady, Grady, what does it want?" And my brother's voice, off-screen, close, said, "Just answer it, Mama." 3 tries. 11 minutes and 40 seconds of my mother in her own kitchen, wearing her good earrings, telling a machine she was her daughter, with my brother 2 feet out of frame, telling her what to click. At 11:42, the session terminated. The last thing on the recording is my mother saying, "Well, this thing's broke," and reaching toward the laptop, and then her hand, huge and blurred, filling the whole screen right before it goes black. Nobody in that conference room said anything for a while. Mr. Dabney took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose and said quietly, 40 minutes later they put a 2021 apostille under a November date on a 2025 deed. I sat there with my hands flat on the table, which is apparently what I do, and I thought about a postcard on a refrigerator. 5 years I'd been sending them. She kept every one. That was how they knew what country to put on the paper. The investigator asked me, gently, whether I could identify the person in the recording for the record. I said, "That's my mother." And then I asked if I could have a minute, and I went out and stood in the stairwell of a state office building in Raleigh, and I put my forehead against the cool painted cinder block, and I did not cry, and I could not have told you why not. When I came back in, Mr. Pike had a legal pad out and was writing fast, and Mr. Dabney was on the phone in the hall, and the lawyer from the Secretary of State's office was closing her laptop. She said the notary's commission would be suspended by the end of the week, and the file would go to the district attorney in Halifax County, and that in her experience the notary would be the first one to talk. She was right about that in 12 days. I gave up the Charlotte apartment in March. I took 2 sections of adult English at the community college and a 1-bedroom over a dentist's office in Roanoke Rapids, because I was not going to do this from 200 miles away. Sherilyn Boyette surrendered her electronic journal on the 23rd of March, with a lawyer from Rocky Mount sitting beside her, and by the end of that month, she had signed a statement. A notary's journal is a boring document. Date, time, type of act, name of the signer, method of identification, and a little box for notes. 19 years of pound cakes and Sunday school, and it all came down to whether she had checked a box that said personally known to me. She had, on a session she watched fail. Her commission was revoked. The bond company that had written her surety paid out and then came after her personally, because that is how bonds work, and the closing office with the bell on the door was gone by June. 19 years, a set of file cabinets and a sign in the window. But she talked, and inside what she said there was a sentence that stopped my lawyer's pen. She said that in January of 2025, 7 weeks before my grandmother died, my mother had come into her office alone and sat down and asked her a question that was not about a closing. She wanted to know what happens if somebody writes out a change to a will in their own hand and signs it, but nobody ever turns it in. Sherilyn said she told her the truth, which is that a will speaks when it is filed, and that a paper nobody files is a paper nobody knows about. And my mother said, "That's what I thought," and thanked her, and left. Mr. Pike put his pen down and looked at me and said, "Andrea, did your grandmother ever mention seeing a lawyer that winter?" I said I didn't know. I said she was mostly past talking by January. That was the truth. It was also the first time in 2 months that I had a feeling in my chest that wasn't dread. And I did not like it, because hope in the middle of something like this is just a longer way to fall. The clerk of Superior Court reopened my grandmother's estate on the 6th of April. This is the part nobody expects, so I'll go slow. In North Carolina, the clerk of Superior Court is the judge of probate. When somebody dies, an executor gets appointed by the clerk, and that executor has to file an inventory and then a final account, and the clerk actually reads them. My mother had been the executor. She had filed a final account in November of 2025 that ran to 2 pages, and on it she had written that the real property passed outside the estate by operation of a 2016 deed, which was true, and that there were no assets requiring administration, which was not. Because the tract sold in June of 2025 for $612,000. And my lawyer had the settlement statement now, and I am going to read you what it said, because those numbers are the whole story of my family. Payoff of the 2021 deed of trust, principal and interest, $214,300. Payoff of a judgment in favor of a hard money lender, $205,000. Payoff of a mortgage on 4412 Sandy Cross Road, Enfield, North Carolina, $96,400. That last one is my parents' house, the house I grew up in. My mother stood in a title office in Enfield in June of 2025 and paid off her own mortgage with money that came out of her mother's land. And then she came home and sat at that kitchen table and told me on speakerphone that these things take 18 months in this state and I should stop calling the lawyer because it ran up the bill. The balance, 96,000 and some, went out in a wire to my brother. He bought a truck. He bought a bass boat. He paid 3 of the 8 people back a little bit, which is the oldest trick there is, because the ones who get paid a little stay quiet the longest. The clerk ordered my mother to file an amended account and to appear on the 11th of August. The clerk also did something I did not ask for and did not expect. When she read the file and saw that the only person in it without a lawyer was an 11-year-old living in the house of the personal representative she was about to remove, she appointed a guardian ad litem for Sadie, a lawyer whose only client is the child, whose only job is to figure out what is actually best for her and tell the court. Her name was Adele Ruffin. She was about 50, and the first time I met her she looked at me for a long minute and said, "Ms. Palmer, I've read the file. I'm going to be blunt. Everybody in this case has a lawyer except an 11-year-old, so now she has me, and I don't care who is angry about it." I said, "Thank God." She said, "Don't thank me yet, I'm going to ask you hard questions too." In the middle of April, I drove out to the Aldridge's place with a folder on the seat beside the hospice binder. They had put a double wide on the rise where my grandmother used to say she would build a real house someday. There was a swing set. Junie was 7 months along with the second one, and she came out on the steps and could not look at me. Because here is what the lis pendens does to people like the Aldridges. It freezes them. They could not sell, they could not borrow against it. Their title insurance was in a claim, and the title company's position, which Mr. Dabney had written down in a letter, was that a forged deed is void, not voidable. Void means it never happened. My brother's signature on that deed was real. Mine was not. So half of those 61 acres had changed hands, and half of them had never left me, undivided, which is a word that means those people had bought a farm they owned exactly 1/2 of. I could have made them buy it twice. That is not a dramatic way of putting it. That is the law. I could have made them pay a second time with money they did not have, or sent a surveyor and a court order out there to cut it down the middle, and the title company would have paid them their policy limit and gone after my family for the rest, and nobody would have said a word against me. I want to tell you what stopped me, and it isn't goodness. It's that Junie Aldridge wrote a letter in June of 2025 to a family she had never met, to ask permission about some stones in the trees. I said, "Mrs. Aldridge, I'm not taking your land." She put her hand over her mouth. I said, "I'm going to sign whatever your lawyer and mine work out, so that the 61 acres are yours, free and clear, for exactly what you already paid, and not a dollar more, because you already paid it. I want 1 acre back, the one with the stones on it, and a lane wide enough to drive a truck to it twice a year." Cal Aldridge came out of the shop wiping his hands and stood there and did not say anything for a minute, and then he said, "We'd have fenced it anyway." I know some of you are going to be angry with me for that. My mother certainly was. When she heard, she told 2 different people at that church that I gave away my grandmother's land to strangers out of spite, which is a sentence I have turned over a lot, and I still can't get it to make sense in any direction. I did not give them $1 of my family's money. Every dollar of that $612,000 stayed exactly where it was, which was on my brother's ledger and my mother's mortgage, and in the hands of a title company that was now, as of the first week of May, filing a lawsuit to get it back from all three of them, jointly and severally, for the false statements in a sworn owner's affidavit. I just decided that the people who found my great-grandparents in the pines and staked around them and waited for permission were not going to be the ones who paid. Driving home from there, I got a call from a number I didn't know. It was Doreen Satterwhite. 78 years old, did my grandmother's hair for 30 years, $45,000 into a solar farm that never existed. She said, "Baby, I'm not calling to ask you for money. I know it's not yours to give." Then she said, "I just want to know if there was ever any solar." I told her the truth. There was never any solar. She was quiet, and then she said, "Well," in the way women of that generation say it, and then she asked me for the district attorney's phone number. I gave it to her, and then I sat in the Hardee's parking lot in Enfield and let myself picture it. 8 people I had known since childhood, dialing each other one at a time, all the way down a list I never touched. The assistant district attorney in Halifax County was a woman named Colleen Trask, and by the second week of May, she had 8 sworn statements from 8 people who had written checks to my brother, plus a notary's journal, plus an 11-minute recording from a server in Utah. Mr. Pike explained the shape of it to me over the phone. Forgery of a deed is a felony in this state. So is uttering a forged instrument, which is a wonderful old word that means using it, handing it to a clerk, letting it be recorded. Obtaining property by false pretenses is a felony, and 8 people times 1 solar farm that did not exist is 8 counts of it. And what my mother did in front of that camera has its own name in the statute book, and the name is identity theft. I asked what happens to my father, who had signed a piece of paper at a closing table because his wife slid it to him. Mr. Pike said, "That depends on whether he keeps saying he didn't read it." On the 3rd Sunday in May, that church held its spring anniversary luncheon in the fellowship hall, and my mother was recognized for 28 years of service to the children's ministry. They gave her a glass plaque. Somebody's cousin took a picture of her holding it with both hands, and she put it up online that night with a caption about how the Lord tests you, and sometimes the test comes from inside your own house. 206 people liked it. I want you to hold that picture in your mind, because at the moment it was taken, a subpoena for her bank records had already been served on a branch 9 miles away, and a woman in Raleigh, with a state seal on her business card, had already watched her lean into a laptop and say my name as if it were hers. She was standing in a fellowship hall with a glass plaque, being congratulated, and she was the only person in the room who thought the story was still about a daughter who left. That is the last good day my mother had. In June, the clerk ordered her to turn over the personal property of the estate, and the guardian ad litem asked me to be at that house when Sadie packed a bag, because a child should have one adult present who is not in the middle of it. Adele Ruffin was in the front room going through a list with my father. Sadie was in the back getting her clothes. My mother was not there. She had gone to her sister's in Weldon for the week, which is what she does. I was in the kitchen because there was a box of my grandmother's things on the table, and I had been told I could look through it. The junk drawer in that kitchen has been the junk drawer since 1994. Rubber bands, batteries, church bulletins, 3 flashlights that don't work, and coupons. Under the coupons there was a yellow legal pad. The top sheet was blank, the sheet under it was not. Andrea J. Palmer. Andrea J. Palmer. Andrea J. Palmer. Down the whole page in 2 columns, 40 or 50 times, in my mother's careful hand, getting better as it went. The first ones on the left were hers with my name in them. By the bottom of the right-hand column, the capital O had my ugly hitch in it, and the L had the flat place where my pen skips. She had practiced my hands. I stood in that kitchen, and I understood something that had not been available to me before. This was not a moment of weakness at a closing table. Nobody panics for 5 years. Somebody sat at this table with a cup of coffee and worked at becoming me the way you work a crossword. Under the legal pad was a blue envelope. It was addressed, in a young woman's handwriting, to the Palmer family, 4412 Sandy Cross Road, Enfield, NC. Postmarked the previous June. It had been opened with a knife, cleanly, and the letter was still inside. And at the top of the letter my mother had written in pencil, "Nothing to do, don't answer." Junie Aldridge had written to say that they had found 4 graves in the pine line, and that they did not want to disturb anybody's people, and that if there was any family left, they would like to know the names so they could put them on a marker. My mother read that and wrote nothing to do. I put the envelope in my coat pocket, next to the gate key, and I asked Adele Ruffin if I could give her something for the file, and I handed her the legal pad. And I went and sat in the car with Sadie's duffel bag on my lap until she came out. The truck went first. They came for it on a Tuesday morning in June, and because the whole county already knew, 4 people saw it happen at once, in the parking lot of the tire shop where my brother had started working in April. The base boat went the same week out of my parents' side yard. My father was standing in the carport when they hooked it up and he did not come out. Then came the lawsuit. First, Carolina Title sued my mother, my father, and my brother, jointly and severally, for $612,000 plus costs, on the owner's affidavit. That is the piece people don't know about. Every seller signs one. Nobody reads it. It says under oath that there are no unrecorded claims and no defects, and when it turns out there was a forgery on the deed, the company that insured around your sworn word has a straight line to your bank account and your house. There was a lien on 4412 Sandy Cross Road by the end of the month. The mortgage my mother had paid off with her mother's land was replaced by something a great deal less forgiving. And in July, the fire department in Fawcett Township had its annual meeting, and my father did not stand for re-election as an equipment officer. 41 years. Nobody asked him to leave. That's the thing about a small county. Nobody asks you to leave. It just gets very quiet around you, and eventually you stop going. He called me one time that summer. He did not ask for anything. He said, "I signed where she pointed. I've been signing where she pointed since 1983. I said, "I know." He said, "Are you going to talk to me at some point?" And I said, "Not yet." And then, because he is 67 and he takes a beta blocker and a blood thinner. And my mother was in Weldon most of that summer, I said, "I called the station on Wednesday and asked Bobby to ride by and check on you every couple of days. He said he would." I was quiet for a second. Then he said thank you and hung up before either of us could ruin it. That is the only kindness I did anybody in that family, and I want to be honest about its size. It was a phone call to a volunteer fire station. It cost me nothing. But I have thought about it since, and I think the reason I made it is that I was raised by a woman who never once in her life checked on anybody without an audience, and I did not want to find out I had learned it. My brother tried 3 more times. The last time was this middle of July, at the Y, in the parking lot, and it was the worst one because Sadie was there. He wanted her to get in his car. She had been staying with me since the middle of June, since Adele Ruffin filed a separate action in district court, and my brother, on his lawyer's advice, with an indictment coming, had consented to a temporary order, and he had visitation, and he had not used it in 3 weeks. "Come on, Sade, get in, we'll go to the lake." And my niece, 11 years old, with her towel still around her neck, said, "You sold great-grandma's graves." I have never heard a grown man's voice do what his did. "That's not, Sadie, that is not what happened." Miss Doreen cried at the Food Lion and everybody heard her. She had her hand on my car door. "She does hair, she's 78. He looked at me, and this is the part I have not been able to put down. He looked at me the way you look at somebody who is supposed to fix a thing, because that is what I have done my whole life. Andrea will handle it. Andrea will stay with Grandma. Andrea will smooth it over." And for a second my whole body wanted to. I said, "You can talk to Mr. Pike." He said my name. I got in the car. 2 weeks later the grand jury met in Halifax County, and there was a stack of true bills, and every one of them had a Palmer on it. My mother came to my apartment in Roanoke Rapids on the last Thursday in July at 7 in the morning, before the heat. I had a second-floor place over a dentist's office with an outside stair, and I heard her on the steps before I saw her, because she has a way of taking stairs like they owe her something. She had a foil pan in her hands. She had made a pound cake at 6 in the morning to bring to the daughter she was suing to be allowed to keep her house. Andrea opened the door. I opened it. Sadie was asleep on the pullout, and I stepped out onto the landing and pulled the door most of the way shut behind me, and I stood there in my work clothes with my keys in my hand, because I had to be at the community college at 8. She said, "This has gone far enough. Do you understand what they are going to do to your brother? He has a child." "I does." "Then help him." She had the pan out in front of her like a shield. "You can tell them you signed. You can tell them you were confused about the dates. People make mistakes on paperwork all the time and it all goes away. It all just goes away, and nobody has to lose anything." There it was, 6 months, and that was the ask. Not "I'm sorry," not "I did it," just "come in here with us and lie, and then we can all go home." "Mama," I said, "I have one question and then I have to go to work." "Don't you use that voice with me. Whose hand is on that page?" She looked at the door behind me, at the 4 inches of it, at the room where her granddaughter was sleeping, and her mouth started to shape the beginning of a word that I know for a fact was going to be my name, said the way you say it when you're about to explain to somebody why what happened to them was their own fault. And I put my hand up. I had a certified copy of the acknowledgement page in my bag because I had carried one everywhere since March. I took it out and I put it in her hands on top of the foil pan. I said, "November 12th. I was on the bathroom floor with her at 4 in the morning. You were at church that Sunday and you told her she looked wonderful." Then I went down the stairs and got in my car and drove to work. And I did not look up at the landing, and I taught 2 sections of adult English. And at lunch I sat in my car in the lot and shook for a while, and then I went back in. That is the last conversation I have had with my mother. The pound cake sat on my landing in the sun all day. Sadie found it when she got home from the pool and asked if she could throw it away, and I said yes, and she did, and neither of us said anything else about it. Adele Ruffin came to my apartment twice that summer with a legal pad of her own. She looked at the pull-out couch. She looked at the one-bedroom and the window unit and the stack of graded papers on the kitchen counter. She asked me what I made, and I told her. And it is not very much. She asked who would get Sadie if I got sick. She asked about the asthma, and I got out the spacer and the log I keep, and the pulmonologist's card in Rocky Mount. Then she put the pad down and asked the one that mattered. "Ms. Palmer, are you doing this for her, or are you doing it because you cannot stand to lose one more thing to those people?" I sat with that longer than she probably expected. I said, "For 11 years, every adult in that child's life has been running a story, and the story is always about what somebody is owed. I don't want to win her. I want her to be somewhere where nobody is keeping score." She wrote something down. She did not tell me what. At the end of that visit, at the door, she said, "You know she has something she hasn't given anybody." "I know. She won't tell me what it is. She told me she can't say until I close the gate. I don't know what that means. Her great-grandmother used to say it to me." Adele Ruffin stood in my doorway with her hand on the frame for a second, and then she said, "I've been doing this 19 years. Children keep the thing they think is a bomb, and they keep it right up until they decide who they trust with the bad news." The hearing before the Clerk of Superior Court was set for the 11th of August at 9 in the morning, in Halifax, in the small courtroom on the first floor. The docket that day had 2 items on it: removal of the personal representative of the estate of Verna Hollis, and a petition to determine ownership of the proceeds of the June 2025 conveyance. Everybody would be in that room. My mother and her lawyer, my brother and his, my father, who by then had his own lawyer, because the title company's lawsuit had made that necessary, and who was living in a rented room over a garage in Halifax, 9 miles from a house he had lived in for 33 years. Mr. Pike called me the night before and told me what to expect and what not to expect. He said, "Clerks don't do speeches. She's going to read documents and ask questions and rule. Don't look at your family, look at her." I said, "Okay." He said, "One more thing, I subpoenaed the hospice nurse." I said, "Faye, why?" And he said, "Because somebody in that courtroom is going to have to authenticate 394 nights, and it is not going to be you." The small courtroom in Halifax has 9 rows and a window unit that runs the whole time, and on the 11th of August it was already 88 degrees at 9 in the morning. My family sat on the left. I sat on the right with Mr. Pike. Sadie stayed out in the hall with Adele Ruffin, a library book, and a backpack she would not let me carry, because a courtroom is no place for a child until it is. The clerk was a woman about 60, with a stack of files and reading glasses, and she did exactly what Mr. Pike said she would do. She read. She asked short questions. When my mother's lawyer started a sentence with, "Your Honor, this family has been through," she said. "Counsel, I have the account in front of me. Explain line 4. Line 4 was $96,400 paid to a mortgage servicer for a house on Sandy Cross Road out of the proceeds of a tract the estate's account said had no value to the estate. He could not explain line 4. Then Mr. Pike called Faye Turnbow. She came in wearing scrubs because she had a patient at 11, and she is not a person who enjoys a room, and she sat down and put her hands in her lap. Mr. Pike put the binder in front of her. 13 months, 394 pages, in a 3-ring binder from a hospital supply closet with a cardboard divider for each month. He asked her to identify it, and Faye said, "That's the caregiver log from Verna Hollis's home. Those are my initials in the margins. I signed them at the visits." He asked her whose handwriting filled the pages. Andrea's, every line of it. He asked her to turn to the 12th of November 2024 and read what was written there. She put her finger on it and read it out loud in a flat voice, the way nurses read. 2 milligrams at 11:40, restless, calling for her mother. Changed bed at 2:15, sang, slept at 4:05. Then Faye Turnbow did something nobody asked her to do. She kept her finger on the page and she said, "Ma'am, can I say something about this book?" The clerk said she could, and Faye said, "I've been doing hospice 20 years. Families keep about 2 weeks of a log. 2 weeks is what love can hold up under. This is 13 months, and there's not a gap in it, and the 3 in the morning entries are in the same handwriting as the noon ones, which means she wasn't sleeping and then writing it down later to look good. Nobody was watching her do this. There wasn't anybody in that house to see it." She closed the binder. "I want the record to say that, because I read in the paper that this girl left her family. She didn't leave. She was the only one in it. I did not look at my mother. I looked at the clerk, like I was told." The clerk looked at me for about 2 seconds over the top of her glasses, and then she wrote something down, and that was all. And I have never in my life been so completely undone by a woman writing something down. 24 years I had been the one who closes the gate. That was the first time anybody said out loud that they saw me do it. At 10:20, the clerk removed my mother as personal representative of the estate of Verna Hollis for breach of fiduciary duty, ordered a full amended accounting under oath within 30 days, and appointed a neutral administrator out of Rocky Mount. At 10:26, my mother's lawyer asked for a 15-minute recess. That is when Sadie came in. She came through the double doors with Adele Ruffin behind her, and she was carrying the King Edward cigar box that had been in the backpack. She would not let me carry that morning with a rubber band around it, the kind my great-grandfather kept nails in, and she walked past the whole left side of that courtroom, past her father, past her grandmother, and she came to the rail and she said, "Aunt Andrea, you closed the gate." I got up. Adele Ruffin said, "Miss Palmer, do not open that. Let the clerk open it." Sadie put the box on the rail and took the rubber band off. On top was a birthday card, a cardinal on the front. Inside, in my grandmother's handwriting, the shaky big letters she used at the end. "To Sadie Ann on your 10th birthday, February 2025. Under the card were 4 sheets of yellow paper, folded in thirds, written in ballpoint, in 2 different inks, and signed and dated the 19th of January, 2025. The clerk read it into the record herself. "I am going to give you the parts I can still say out loud. I, Verna Louise Hollis, of Fawcett Township, Halifax County, being of sound mind if not sound legs, write this myself, because there is nobody left in this house I want to ask for help with it." In June of 2021, Lorraine brought papers to this table and told me they were so the taxes would not take the farm. I signed where she pointed. Grady signed. The name they put down for Andrea is not Andrea's hand. I know my granddaughter's hand. She writes her O like a hook, and she always has. When I deeded the farm in 2016, I put Grady's name on his half for Sadie Ann's sake, and he sat in that chair and promised me the child would have it. I am writing it down, because a promise that is not written down is a promise a man can talk himself out of later. Andrea is the only one who ever closed the gate behind her. Sadie Ann, you keep this until your aunt closes the gate. Then you give it to her, and she will know what to do. Nobody in that courtroom said anything. The window unit kept running. My grandmother had known. Sometime in her last winter, in the room I was sleeping outside of, in the hours I thought she was asleep, She had gotten a pen twice and written down what was being done to us, and then she had put it where the only person she trusted could keep it. An 11-year-old, for 18 months. Mr. Pike stood up and said two things, quietly, for the record. That the document appeared to be a holographic instrument entirely in the decedent's hand, deposited with a person for safekeeping. And that regardless of how the clerk ruled on that, it was a written declaration by the grantor that the grantee of the other half took it in trust for a minor child, which meant that every dollar of my brother's share of $612,000 had never been his to borrow, spend, or pay a bookie with. He said he would be filing that one upstairs as a civil action, because it was not the clerk's to decide. The clerk asked my brother if he wished to respond. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. He responded anyway. He said, "Mama, tell them about the promise." And my mother, 63 years old, with her purse in her lap, in a courtroom, in front of a clerk and a stenographer and her own granddaughter, said, "I don't remember any promise." That is the moment his face changed. Not when the truck went, not when the indictments came. Right there, when he found out where he was on her list. We took the recess in the hallway, on a bench by the vending machines, and that is where it stopped being a case. Sadie sat down next to me with the empty cigar box still in her hands, and she started to shake. "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. I had it since my birthday." Her voice went up at the end of every word. "Great-grandma said give it to Aunt Andrea, and then she died, and then Daddy said you were mad at us, and Grandma Lorraine said if anybody found out about a box, then the police would come. So I put it under my bed, and she found the birthday card in my drawer the week after the funeral and asked me what else Great-grandma gave me, and I said nothing, and she looked at me for a really long time. And then it was a really long time, and then it was too long, and I couldn't figure out how to give it to you without you knowing I had it the whole time." 11 years old. She had done the math a child does, which is that telling the truth late is worse than never telling it. And she had carried a dead woman's handwriting under a bed for 18 months, while the adults around her sold the ground it was written about. I said, "You did exactly what she asked you to do. You waited for the gate. That's the whole job she gave you, and you did it perfect." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and then she said it. "Aunt Andrea, can they have my part?" I said, "What?" "The money. The part that's mine now." She was looking at the cigar box. "Because if he gives it back, it's not stealing anymore, right? So can they have my part so Daddy doesn't have to go to jail?" I want you to understand that I had spent 6 months being very good at this. I had been calm at a title office, calm at a register of deeds counter, calm in a conference room, watching my mother hold up my passport. I had been the flattest, most accurate woman in Halifax County since February. I did not do well with that one. I had to put my elbows on my knees and look at the floor tile for a second before I could get to the end of a sentence. "No, baby," I said. "It doesn't work like that. Giving it back doesn't undo it, and it isn't your job. It has never been one day of your life your job to buy anybody out of what they did. But he's my dad. Hi is. And he's going to be your dad the whole rest of your life, and that isn't up to a judge or to me or to you." I had to stop again. "Nothing you own can fix him, Sadie. If it could, your great-grandmother would have done it with 84 acres. She cried the way kids cry when they have been holding it since they were 10, which is not loud. Adele Ruffin came and sat on the other side of her and did not say a word. And we sat there, the three of us, in front of a vending machine, for maybe 4 minutes. Then Sadie asked Miss Adele for a piece of paper. She wrote on it against the cigar box on her knees for a while. Then she folded it in half and stood up and said she wanted to give it to her daddy herself, and Adele Ruffin looked at me, and I said it was her letter. They came out at 11:05. My mother went past us to the water fountain like we were a fire hydrant. My brother stopped. Sadie held out the folded paper and he took it and he said, "Sade," and my niece said, in the voice you use in a library, "Read it later." He unfolded it right there anyway, because he has never in his life been able to wait for anything, and I watched a grown man read half a page of an 11-year-old's handwriting in a courthouse hallway. She told me later what it said, and she gave me permission to tell you. It said, "I gave them great-grandma's letter because she asked me to, and because it is true. I am going to live with Aunt Andrea. I am not mad at you. I am tired of being the reason people are quiet. Please don't ask me to be quiet anymore. I love you. Sadie." He stood in that hallway with the paper in both hands. He said, "Baby, I'm going to fix all of this." And she said, "Okay." Which is the most terrible word an 11-year-old has ever said in front of me, because she did not say it like she believed him. She said it the way you say it to somebody at the end of a phone call you have already had 9 times. Then she took my hand, which she had never done in her life, and we walked out. Adele Ruffin had a form in her file that afternoon. It is a plain thing, 1 page, where a child old enough to understand can put in her own words where she wants to live, so the court has it in the record. Sadie filled hers out at the picnic table outside the courthouse annex with a pen from the clerk's counter and signed it on the line, and she asked me how to spell Roanoke. We were in the parking lot at 11:40 when 2 deputies came out the side door of the courthouse with the assistant district attorney. They did not run and nobody yelled. One of them said my brother's name in a normal voice, the way you'd say it at a parts counter, and told him there was a true bill and that he needed to come with them. He put his hands behind his back on his own. He was still holding the letter, and one of the deputies took it out of his fingers and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, which I thought was a kind thing, and told him he'd get it back at intake. My mother was arraigned 8 days later on 4 counts, including identity theft. Sadie was in the car with the door shut and the air conditioning running, and I made sure of that before any of it happened, and I want the people who ask me later to know that I did that on purpose. She watched anyway, through the windshield, because she is not stupid and it was her father. All she said when I got in was, "Can we go home?" Home was a 1-bedroom apartment over a dentist's office with a pull-out couch and a window unit. I said yes. 11 months later, my mother pled guilty in April to identity theft and to forgery of an instrument, and she was sentenced to an active term of 10 to 21 months. Her lawyer asked for probation and read a letter about 28 years of children's ministry, and the judge said he had watched the recording. Before any of that, the church had already, quietly, given the 4-year-old's Christmas program to a younger woman. Nobody voted on it. There was just a different name in the bulletin one Sunday. She is not allowed to sign anything for anybody now. Not for the estate, not for my father, not on a bank card. A neutral administrator in Rocky Mount signs where she used to sign, and the clerk reads what he files. For a woman whose whole life was being the one who handled the paperwork for everybody, I don't know that they could have built a smaller room. The house on Sandy Cross Road sold at the end of March. The money went to the title company, which was owed more than the house was worth. My father lives in a rented room over a garage in Halifax. He is 68. The judgment on the owner's affidavit follows him and will follow him because he swore to something he did not read, which he had been doing since 1983. He got the silence he always chose. It turns out it is much larger when nobody else is in it. Twice a year I let him mow the graveyard acre. He brings his own gas. We do not talk much. When he is done, he stands at the fence for a minute with his hat in his hand, and then he goes. My brother pled to the false pretenses counts. There is a restitution order for $248,000 and a payment schedule that will outlive him, and he works at the tire shop in Enfield, and he writes Sadie a letter about every other week. She reads them when she wants to and puts them in the cigar box when she doesn't. Miss Adele told her that is allowed, and I have made myself say nothing about it. Sherilyn Boyette does filing for an insurance agency in Rocky Mount. The bond company took her savings. She sent me a card at Christmas that said she was sorry, and I did not answer it, and I have decided that is allowed too. Doreen Satterwhite got $12,000 back so far. She still does hair on Thursdays. Pastor Lyle picks her up for her eye appointments now, and 2 of the 8 have started driving her to the grocery store, which is the only good thing my brother ever built. The Aldridges had a boy in June of last year. The fence is up around the 4 stones. Junie put my great-grandparents' names on a stone marker herself, spelled right, and in April she planted zinnias inside the fence, because I mentioned once that my grandmother used to bring them. Sadie's share is in a trust, a judge-approved, with a bank in Rocky Mount as trustee, and an annual accounting the clerk reads, and she cannot touch the principal until she is 25. It came out of the settlement and out of what was left when everything got sold, and it is not what it should have been, and it is enough. She knows the number. I made sure she knows the number, because in that family the money was always a secret, and secrets are what did this. She is 12. She lives with me under a custody order a district judge signed in September, consented to, with Adele Ruffin's report attached to it. She has her own room now, because we moved in October to a place with two, over a laundromat, which is warmer and smells like dryer sheets, and she says she likes it better. At school in the spring, they had them do a project on a job, and she picked surveyor. She came and sat on the arm of the couch and told me about it, and I asked her why, and she said, because they're the ones who say where the line actually is. And then they put a pin in the ground, and after that people can say whatever they want, but the pin's already there. I had to go do something in the kitchen for a minute. Last decoration day, we drove out to the acre with the stones on it. The Aldridges left the old gate where it was, because Cal said it wasn't his to move. There is still a padlock on it, mine now. The brass key with the orange twine still hangs on the same loop, and it still doesn't fit the new lock, and I have never replaced it, because it was never really about the gate. Sadie carried the zinnias. We put them in the jar, and we sat on the tailgate and let the heat come up out of the hay. And when we left, she got out on her own and pushed the gate to and put the chain around it and clicked it shut. She said, "Is that right?" And I said, "That's right, you're the one who closes the gate now." The hay had just been cut. That whole field goes gold about the second week of September, and the light comes across it low and sideways at about 7 in the evening, and my grandmother used to stand at the edge of it with her arms crossed and not say anything for a long time. I finally understand what she was doing. I've told you the whole thing now, and I want to sit with you for one more minute, the way you would at a kitchen table after everybody else has gone home. Somebody told me to stay quiet for the good of the family, and I did. For 6 months before that notary's office, and honestly for about 20 years before that, I was the one who kept the peace by making myself small, and I want to say plainly what I learned, because it cost a lot to learn it. A family that needs your silence is not asking you to be loyal. It is asking you to be the paperwork. And the thing about staying quiet is that it never stops at one thing. It starts with not making a scene at a table, and one day you find out your name has been written by somebody else's hand, 40 times, on a legal pad, under the coupons. I did not burn anything down. Everything that happened to those people was written in their own handwriting, in offices that keep records forever, and read out loud by strangers whose job it is to read. So here is what I want to ask you, and then I'll let you go. Has somebody in your life ever told you to be quiet for the good of the family? And did you do it? And what did it cost you in the end, staying quiet? Tell me in the comments. I read them. I read every single one, even the long ones, especially the long ones. And if you are sitting there tonight with a folder or a feeling that something is off, and you have been talking yourself out of it for a year, I hope you'll say so out loud, even if it is only to a stranger on the internet at 11 o'clock at night. Thank you for staying with me all the way through this one. I'll see you in the next story.